Following is a Big Sioux Media production.
Good evening and welcome to the Voices of the Big Sioux. I'm Lee Palmer, the host of Voices of the Big Sioux. Matt Larson, our technical guru behind the scenes tonight. Last month we had Alan Bertram of Sacred Hoops, and tonight we are so honored, and I cannot say that highly enough, to have Mike Henriksen with us. When we decided to start doing these podcasts, years ago when we kind of hummed and hawed, the first name that came to the top of the list every single time was yours, Mike.
Well, that's very kind. I appreciate it. And the nice thing is I can actually see the monitor over there because a lot of times I get into interviews on camera and I realize that my posture is really atrocious. So I'll try to correct that for you tonight. But it's an honor to be here. I appreciate the time. This is wonderful.
We have a couple thank yous to get going before we do this. First of all, the biggest thank you is, if it wasn't for Del Rapids Area News, there wouldn't be Big Sioux Media. And you started that. And so on behalf of Matt and I, the fact that you started something like this that we've been able to help grow has been a huge thank you to you.
Well, that's very kind. The energy level and the complexity and all of those things that you have brought to it is one of the reasons that you know, I had taken it as far as I probably could, and so it's just been a real blessing to the community, but that's because of what you guys have done, taking it that next step and stepping up the schedule so considerably.
The second thank you is on behalf of both of us. You've been a mentor to both of us. It's easy for us if there's a question, or I remember when I first started here 4 years ago and I was going, I got a 65-point blowout. What do I do in the second half? And you've always been able to respond. You've always given great advice to both of us, and you've been a great mentor to the two of us.
Well, that's very kind. I was very fortunate when I was new in this state. Danny Olson and Norm Hilson, Danny in Sioux Falls at KSOO specifically, and Norm Hilson at WNAX, both of them were very, very kind and supportive of me, and so I've always tried to. I didn't know what the term "pay it forward" was, but because they were kind to me, I've always felt obligated to help out others who have asked, whether it be for advice or those types of things. Also, I was so lucky, John Egan, who was the longtime sports writer for the Sioux Falls Argus-Leader, we just lost John here recently. John, you know, here I was, and I've maybe told this story before, but here I am. I'm basically working at the college radio station covering Augustana and going on the road, you know, for quite a few of their games and doing their home games for the college radio station. And here's John Egan, who was by far and away the preeminent sports writer in the state of South Dakota, and he's treating me like a peer. And I appreciated that greatly. And again, that was one of those things that stuck with me. So yeah, I'm not as helpful as I probably should be, but I try to be as helpful as I can.
And we appreciate that.
Thank you.
So as I was preparing for tonight, I kind of thought how to title it. So, broadcaster for over 30 years in the state of South Dakota, host of Sports Max, the weekly radio show that you have that's broadcast across the state, co-host of Calling All Sports with Mark Overton, sports historian, voiceover for 2 winning documentaries for South Dakota Public Broadcasting, South Dakota Public Broadcasting high school sports announcer, proud husband, proud father, proud grandfather, golf fanatic, Royals fan, which we won't hold against you. Somebody said last week, I heard him call you an icon in the state, and now author of first-person legendary South Dakota sports stories. What haven't you accomplished yet that you still, in the media sense, that you want to get through after you hear all of that list?
Lee, you made me sound really, really busy. And honestly, the book has made me busier than I am. I'm not that big of a golf fanatic. I enjoy being around golf courses. I pale in comparison to Mark Overton. Overton used to be, before Great Life came along, he was one of those guys that if he was getting his clubs out, he was playing 27 holes. That's at least. That was his minimum. Now, he can, you know, if he's got time to just play a few, that's what he'll do. But I do enjoy golf. What do I have left? Gosh, I didn't really know that I was going to be doing this. You know, I'd like to call a Royals game. I'd like to call a Huskers game. You know, all of those types of things that are still left over from my youth. But I've been so blessed. The opportunity with South Dakota Public Broadcasting is really what, you know, what I suppose a lot of people associate me with, which is wonderful because they're just a great group of people to work with. The first year that we actually did that, Craig Maddock and I had an afternoon sports talk show. This is back in 2001. Had an afternoon sports talk show, and actually Kello had lost the contract to PAX TV. I don't know if you remember PAX. They were out of Rapid City, and PAX actually, they had the same opportunity that Fox Sports back in the was early 90s. Yep. When Fox got the NFL. All of a sudden, everybody had to have Fox on their cable system. It was, you know, that's what introduced us to Fox. And PAX actually had the same opportunity. They didn't take advantage of it, but they are the ones who actually got Craig and I involved in the TV broadcasts. And what they had us do that first year primarily was sit at a table at a panel like you see on all of the pregame and postgame shows, and preview the game or discuss the game afterwards, talk at halftime. And then they had their guys actually doing the play-by-play. Well, back in those days, Craig and I were doing about 150 games on the air, on radio, play-by-play. And it suddenly dawned on somebody, wait a minute, we have guys who are doing all these games all year round, rather than these guys from PAX that only do play-by-play on a very limited basis. So that switched our role. And then a couple of years later, South Dakota Public Broadcasting took over in full. And so Craig and I have been lucky enough to be the lead guys ever since. But they're so great to work with. And Maddock is so enjoyable. Craig doesn't get the due that he deserves. Craig, listen, I do football, baseball, and basketball. That's it. As Tony Kornheiser would say, that's the list. Maddock does wrestling. Maddock does volleyball. Maddock does track, in addition to all of those things. Maddock does soccer. Maddock, he's really good at all of them. But like I say, he doesn't get the due, and I've described this before. Craig and I mesh so well because of the fact he is the most prepared broadcaster that I've ever worked with. And he keeps things going in a linear fashion. That allows me to kind of loop around and, you know, have a little bit more fun and bring in who the, you know, senator's uncle is. And, you know, that's a famous quote from a couple years back. But all of those types of things that I get to bring to the broadcast is all because of the fact that Craig Maddock is so good at what he does. And because the people behind the scenes at public broadcasting are so good at what they do.
And you guys have been a staple. I mean, we've watched you in action. We go to the tournaments, and when you say how much fun it is, people don't get to see, especially in the basketball tournament. They don't get to see during the commercial breaks. Right. But the two of you are always laughing.
We are.
I mean, it's just constant.
We're chatting with the truck. We're chatting with each other, whatever the case may be. The first few years, we had to be real careful with that because back in the early days of us doing that, our feed was always live over the internet. So we had to really, you know, be careful what we said between breaks. And there were perhaps a couple of times that we needed to be reminded of that because of something that we may have just been discussing. But now that's all taken care of and we can talk about whatever it is we want to talk about.
One of the things I didn't put in that list because I wanted to do it separately is what a staple you are to Del Rapids as well. You were part of the Baseball Association for many years.
Yep.
You have been a civic leader around here. You are known in town. You have pointed out people that need recognition. And when we put this together, I said, Mike would never sit there and pat his own back, so we need to pat it for you.
Well,
so that's, you know, for what we can do, what little we can do to help you, you know, for what you've done for this community.
Well, I appreciate it. This community has been very, very good to us. We moved here when Marin was going into 7th grade and JD was going into 5th grade. And Marin, our daughter, is now 38 years old and a teacher, and JD is now 36 years old and a teacher. So, yeah, Dells has been very, very kind. The Baseball Association, getting that put together, that was wonderful. But again, that was a lot less of my doing than what has sometimes been passed down in history. People like George Henry got involved right away. Terry Funenstein got involved right away. Denny Drew got involved right away. It was just simply a way to have one entity. Back when my kids were playing and before, you would have the coach for the Legion team knocking on doors, looking for donations. Then you would have the coach from the Teener team knocking on those same doors. You'd have the Little League team, you'd have the softball team, you'd have all of those all looking, for support. And the businesses in town were wonderful. But once we could actually put most of that into one entity, and you'd also have, the Teener guy would want to talk to the city about field maintenance, or the amateur teams would want to say, hey, can we help set up this schedule? Once we put that all into just the one entity, it made life worlds easier for all involved. And the community responded great, too. We were able to raise an awful lot of money in a short period of time, and that continues to be the case.
So as we look at this, one of the reasons we really wanted to bring you in was first person, this book. We talked when you, get it up there. We talked about it when you were going through the process. We said we wanted to talk about it after you kind of got settled down and went on the whirlwind.
Right.
I remember one comment you made, and you said, I didn't know how hard this was going to be.
Right.
Talk about the process and what you learned through the process of putting this together.
I will say, Lee, that the things that I know that I didn't know a year ago are things I never knew I needed to know. All right? Does that make sense?
Yep.
Because it was actually, it's been about 13 months now, I suppose, when I first started the book, and it's been out now for a couple of months. People have talked to me about writing a book for a long time. And a lot of people, I've been known to spin a yarn and tell a story or two, and so I think a lot of people, when they encouraged me to do that, they were thinking that I was going to tell stories about my experiences in South Dakota. Well, in South Dakota sports specifically. Well, there's a couple of problems with that. And the biggest one is too many people I know are still alive. So consequently, that's out. But a few years ago, we lost Bob Laskowski. And Bob Laskowski, for folks maybe on the east side of the state, they aren't as familiar with Bob as they should be, although he did wrap up his career down in Sioux Falls at KWSN. He actually took my place when I left Craig Maddox's show. And Bob was a wonderful storyteller, and he was a truly iconic figure in the world of sports. He was doing both radio and TV. He was doing a TV sportscast after he got done doing a play-by-play game out in Rapid City. And Bob suffered from Parkinson's disease, and for about the last couple years of his life, he was basically non-communicative, which is just heartbreaking for this natural-born communicator. And when Bob passed away, that's kind of what put me in mind of this type of format. So what the book actually is 15 interviews that I've done on SportsMax, long-form interviews, transcribed into book form. Because as great as technology is and digital world has changed everything, it's not that long ago that when you did a radio interview, for instance, you may burn off a CD and send it off to the family, but then in general, or you could go and download it if you really wanted to find it, but in general, that interview was gone. And so consequently, to be able to put it in book form, it's just another way to hold on to some of the history in the state of South Dakota, and more specifically, the stories of the people. You're not going to find a lot of facts and figures in this book. The best compliments that I've gotten so far are the people that have said, I'm not a sports fan, and I really enjoyed this. My sister-in-law, as a matter of fact, at Easter, she had bought one, and I'm pretty sure that was just a pity buy, but she actually read it and greatly enjoyed it. And so the process was tougher and longer than I thought it was going to be. Trying to find someone to transcribe this was tough. I tried some individuals, finally settled on a company, because if I transcribed it, we'd be waiting for this for another 4 years, okay? But I finally found a company that did it. But we also, as much as we like to think we speak in complete sentences, we don't.
No.
And so consequently, when you physically hear the audio interview, say, with Carroll Hardy, who is in the book, he was Bo Jackson before Bo Jackson. He's from Sturgis, South Dakota. Played in the NFL and in Major League Baseball, and he's the only guy to ever pinch hit for Ted Williams. But when you hear him, the way our brains work, you understand that it's an 82-year-old person, and so perhaps the stories are a little circular. When you put that down in print, that's a different deal. Then it becomes a little tougher to read. So I was able to get the permission from various people to sort of massage it, to put it into readable form, and they trusted me with the fact that I was going to keep the content, because really that's what it's all about, is keeping the content of the people who, whose stories are in here. I wanted to balance it out. How I came up with 15, that was kind of a number that my publisher gave me. Which 15 was the toughest part? There's about 5 or 6 that, no matter what the list was that I did, those 5 or 6 were always going to make the book. We've got some, because I've done, hundreds of long-form interviews. But just in case this is the only one, and it may be and it may not be, I wanted to make sure that it was geographically balanced. I wanted to make sure it was sports balanced. I also wanted to make sure it was culturally balanced. And I wanted to make sure that there were people in there that everybody knew and people in there that nobody knew, but should be known. And so that was the toughest part of putting it all together. And then, like I say, the length, it takes a while, because my priority of getting the cover done isn't the same priority as the guy doing the cover. He's working on 5 others, the layout person, the printing. You don't know if you're going to, with your order of 1,000 books, if you're going to be put in line behind someone who has an order for 100,000 books. So that draws the process out. Believe me, if I do another one, the process will be worlds smoother and quicker.
You said your publisher picked 15. You say hundreds of interviews. I would say thousands of interviews.
Probably.
When you sat down and they said 15, how long did it take you to get to 15?
Until I quit. I mean, it literally, I could still be figuring that out now. But I got to the point where I matched those criterion at least well enough. Now, that doesn't mean there's people that I don't go, gosh, I wish I would have included them, or darn. One thing that made it easier was when we moved out of Del Rapids up to Coleman a couple years ago. We're now back. But when we moved, I lost about 3 years worth of interviews. So that actually made it easier. That's why I used hundreds of interviews rather than thousands, because I misplayed. And I'm not going to say they're lost. I'm simply going to say that I haven't found the zip drive that they're on yet. I'm still convinced it's out there somewhere. I know one of these days I'm going to pop open a tote and there it's going to be. So, but yeah, it was tough, Lee. There was so many directions I could have gone. One of the easiest things in the world would have been, here's a book of 15 old white basketball coaches.
No.
That would have been easy. Football coaches. Here's a track book. And that would have been fine. But I wouldn't have felt quite as proud of it as I do with this one.
So going back to that, let's take that thousands of interviews that you've done.
Right.
Let's take the 15 out of the book.
Okay.
What is the most memorable interview that you've ever had?
You know, that's really, really tough, because there are so many people that I have have known personally and plain and simple loved. And so consequently, I'm going to enjoy that interview more than most. That's going to pop up. Maybe the most unbelievable interview that I've ever done is actually in the book, and that's why it's in the book, is Dan Jensen. Dan Jensen is a Sioux Falls kid. He's almost 70 now, but he is now one of the world's ultra triathletes and was non-athletic in school, was a musician, went over to Vietnam and stepped on a mine and lost the lower third of his leg. And now he is, as I say, one of the biggest, most successful ultra triathletes. That means he did a marathon, a triathlon. That means he did 10. And if my math on this is right, that means he ran 263 miles.
Yeah.
That means he swam, is it 2.4 that they swim?
Something like that.
So he swam 24 and he biked whatever, 1,000 miles. Yeah. And he's doing it all with just one leg. Phenomenal. So that story is amazing to me. Frank Wan, who is from the He Dog community in Sioux Falls, or in South Dakota, down on the Rosebud Reservation. I got to be honest with you, Lee. You know how you prepare for interviews and that sort of thing. And when I got Frank Wan on the line, I knew Frank had been a good basketball player at White River. I knew that he was now rising up pretty quickly in the world of Native American hip hop. My knowledge of Native American hip hop, pretty minimal. Okay, just pretty minimal. And so that was one where I rode along as much just, using the listening skills as I did the preparation skills.
When you looked back, were there interviews that you had forgotten you had done?
Yes.
And all of a sudden brought back an emotion or an event or something like that?
Yes.
As you were sitting there and said, oh my gosh, I totally forgot about that interview.
Yep, absolutely. I came across, and as a matter of fact, I came across this rather recently, or he probably would have made the book. Larry Luchins, the legendary coach out of Custer. I had forgotten the fact. In the back of your mind that you've talked to him, but I've talked to Larry a lot of times. I'd forgotten that I'd done the long interview with him shortly after he had recuperated, or I don't know that recuperate is the right word, but shortly after he was winning his battle with cancer.
Yeah.
And I came across that just recently, and like I say, had I known that one, he probably would have made the book because it's a fascinating interview. But yeah, going through, and there are times even early on, I did a lousy job of chronicling the interviews that I did because I was young. I, had all my capacities. I'll remember this. Of course I'll remember this. And those of you that get to a certain age, that's one of our prime things is, the biggest lie we tell ourselves is that, yeah, I'll remember this. But consequently, I have done a better job then in the process of doing this book. When there were downtimes, I would actually go back and listen to other interviews and kind of figure out when I had done it, who exactly they were, why did I have this person on the air, those types of things. So it was fun. Some of the interviews I've done through the years, I'll go back and find the guy that was the Joe Robbie Award winner down in the Dome 20 years ago and see what they're up to these days, those types of things. But yeah, believe me, there's a ton of stuff that I've come across and forgotten over the course of time that, oh gosh, that was fun, or that we talked about a specific topic.
You talked about as age goes on and losing that. I don't think people really understand how much of a steel trap your mind is, though. Because I have watched you, like I said, I've watched you in the Dome, I've watched you at state basketball tournaments, and you don't have a lot of notes in front of you.
No.
And you're pulling stuff from 25 years ago and you're remembering it. So Give yourself a little bit more credit than that.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean I can tell you what I had for lunch on Monday. I mean, I got a better chance at telling you who the starting five was for Northern State, in 1984, than I do as to some recent things. But part of it is, Lee, I've been very, very fortunate. Early in my career, I talked about the fact that I was at the Augie radio station, so I got to know some of the folks in Sioux Falls, but then I've worked at several different markets across the state. I've worked in Gregory, I've worked in Madison, I've worked in Mitchell. And so consequently, you get to know a lot of these people. And the nicest thing is in South Dakota is there's only 850,000 of us.
Yes.
And I'm pushing 40 years. As a matter of fact, this fall will be 40 years in South Dakota. And so I've been lucky to get to know some of these people. And when you go to tournaments, you'll see, I'll use Dale Weber. Just because I had a conversation with him here recently. You'll see Dale Weber, who was supposed to go into the South Dakota Sports Hall of Fame. You'll see him at a game, and you'll go, well, wait a minute, Dale's from Salem, Dale Weber's from Salem. What's he doing at this AA tournament? And you'll talk to Dale, and he'll go, well, number 27 is my grandson. Okay, mental note, number 27,
Yep.
his grandpa is going into the South Dakota Sports Hall of Fame. And that's just as an example. So, and the story that I referred to, I gave up doing football, and which you guys know, but because every year the field was just getting about 5 yards longer for these old eyes, and it seemed like every time that I was broadcasting, I was sitting higher and higher up. When they added on to Howard Wood Field, that was great that they put in an elevator, but it also meant that we were 2 stories farther away from the field. So I gave up on football, and I was at County Fair out here, and it was just shortly, and I announced it on social media and stuff, but not everybody's on social media, and I'm literally out at County Fair, and it's like the Tuesday before the Dome this past fall, and I'm in line, and the guy couple rows over, goes, so getting ready to go down to Vermilion? And I said, no, I gave it up. And that's when he uttered the famous line. He yells across County Fair at me, well, how the hell am I going to know who the center's uncle is? and which pretty much nailed things. But the funny thing is, too, through the course of the years, you guys would be surprised. Maybe not. I know there's a lot of you out there that think the same way. There's an awful lot of people that have told me specifically to just shut up and do the game. We don't care who's related to whom. We don't care about any of those things. Just do the game. And my answer, of course, is no. That's not how I broadcast. I've been doing it that way for a long time, and I'm going to continue doing it that way until I stop broadcasting.
And I hope that stays forever because we've enjoyed it immensely. Matt and I were talking as we were preparing for this a couple weeks ago as we were sitting down talking. We were kind of looking, we're so young into this.
Right.
Our combined years is still a quarter of what you've done.
Right.
Is there one game that sticks out in your mind?
There is, but it's not one that I even broadcast. I still think probably the greatest individual achievement and maybe the greatest game that I've ever watched was when, this is a reference to Northern again, but when Northern with Ryan Miller came down and beat South Dakota State for the chance to go to the Elite Eight. And they did it in Brookings, and Miller puts 47 on the board, and everybody and their dog. And State was good. I mean, State was really, really good, but so was Northern. And everybody and their dog knew that Ryan Miller was going to shoot the ball and didn't mean anybody could stop him. And he'd just take another half step deeper the next trip down the floor. And that's one that really stands out. But there's been so many great games that I've been able to be a part of. One of the calls that I maybe get reminded of on a regular basis as much as any is the Hail Mary when Winter won the football game, the state title over Tri-Valley. But what people forget is that was one of the dullest football games on the planet. It was horrible. It was all it was 3 yards, pound each other, beat the crap out of each other. It was a not entertaining football game. Thank heavens. As a matter of fact, on some of the clips, you can even hear I'm ticked because they're going to go to overtime. Each team has several timeouts left, and they're just going to go to overtime. Well, why would you go to overtime? You haven't decided anything in the time you've been playing. What are you going to overtime for? And then, of all people, it's Dan Aker who decides to call timeout and go for the Hail Mary. So there you go. that was my favorite tournament to do. Was actually, and I think it was 2007, and Dells was in it, but it was the tournament out in Spearfish, the State A tournament. Vermilion won it, and that was as good of a tournament, top to bottom, as I've ever seen in my life. McCook Central was in that tournament. The Walschlager girl from Millbank, they were in it. Just an awful lot of really, really good players and good teams. I firmly believe that even though Vermilion won that, I firmly believe that you could have gone back on Monday, played it all over again, and had a completely different 1-8 outcome. And plus, you woke up every morning and you were still in Sturgis. So that worked out great, too. So as you've done that, you've done the double A's for the boys, you've done the girls' A's. Is there a tournament, or even maybe football now that you've been a year removed, is there one tournament that you like doing more than the others? In football, I always said 11B was my favorite class because it's plain and simple the most competitive. Just about every year, with the exception of this run that Winter was on here recently, you could tell me that there were 8 to 10 to 12 teams that were going to win a state title, and I couldn't argue against you. From a basketball standpoint, it used to be that we would rotate. If we did the boys, we'd do the girls A and then the boys B, and then we'd do it was a rotation for Craig and I each year. Now the last few years, it's been girls A and then boys and girls combined double A. But really, it's tough to beat the boys A tournament from top to bottom. At least it has it. And the bad thing is, for me as a fan, when I'm doing that combined tournament, I know nothing about what's going on in the boys B and the boys A, because on that Friday and Saturday, Craig and I basically park ourselves at center court at 10 o'clock in the morning, and we don't leave until 10 o'clock at night because it's 6 games in a row. And I know that the A is going to that format this year too, so that'll be interesting to see how that transpires. It's been wonderful, in my opinion, for the double A. But yeah, in football, definitely the 11B was always my favorite, and for basketball, boys A.
So those that might not know you as well as others of us have done, you are not afraid to share opinions once in a while?
I've been known to do that.
So with some of the changes that you've seen come down in the past 5-10 years through the State High School League,
right,
whether it's the combined basketball tournaments, whether it's 7 classes of football,
right,
where have you seen the good? Where have you seen the bad?
Well, my pretty standard answer for the years when I was doing football, when people would ask me about classes, was, I get paid by the game. I hope we go to 15 classes. What do I care? We'll start Monday with co-ed touch, and we'll just, we'll go from there. Flag football. The problem is, and I'm delighted, by the way, 6-man football. Yeah. I'm delighted that that's coming along. I think that's great. I don't know what the answers are when it comes to those types of situations. Faith isn't co-oping with anybody. Yeah. There's nobody out there. Harding County, that's it. That's your team. So consequently, when we see that at the bigger school levels, I think it was kind of silly that we have, the 2 bigger classes of school, the AA and the AAA. That seems a little silly to me. As far as basketball, like I say, I like the combined. I know a lot of people are worried outstate about Sioux Falls getting everything and all of the tournaments, and maybe combining all the boys' tournaments in one location and the girls' tournaments. In my opinion, that ship has sailed. Sioux Falls doesn't have room for a combined tournament. There's no place to put them. You've got the Summit League. This year you have the NAIA tournament. You've got the Northern Sun. Yeah. You've got the Northern Sun. You've got, I don't think that's a threat at all anymore. The good news is you can still walk into just about any bar or restaurant in South Dakota, and if you are looking to strike up a conversation/argument, just bring up the 3-class system. And that's all the way back in 1987.
Yeah.
And, none of the kids alive now have any idea what you're talking about when you bring up the 2-class system. So there's guys with a lot higher pay grade than me to make those decisions. I don't envy them because of the fact all of the growth in this state is in the southeast corner. And that's not the case elsewhere. So it's a son of a gun by the time you're figuring out geography, etc.
Where's your favorite place? Like high school, you've been in a lot of high school gymnasiums. You've been in college gymnasiums. Favorite high school gymnasium to have done a game in?
Ooh, that's tough. There's a ton, and I've been very, very fortunate. And this answer can change at any given, if we get, actually this whole interview could change. If we came back tomorrow, Lord knows what I might, be saying. But one that I was just in recently, because my grandson was playing there, and I hadn't been in the gym in 30 years, and I think the guys still credit me with naming the place, and that's the Rambler Dome up at Rutland. I used to do games up there when I was at, and supposedly I made reference a couple of times to the Rambler Dome. They've told me that, and I remember calling it that, but I don't remember that being my own, name. But that's such an old, little dive of a gym, and it kind of the throwback type of feeling. But it's tough to beat doing a game at the Premier Center too on the other side of things. So there's an awful lot. Let's just say I've been really, really blessed. I did figure out that, and it was actually traveling for the book. I figured out that there is not a single college or professional franchise, with the exception of hockey, because I don't do hockey, but the pro basketball and the pro football franchises that were in Sioux Falls and in Rapid, and every single college in the state of South Dakota, I've had the good fortune of doing a game at, or covering in one form or another. And that's for football and basketball. I don't know that I necessarily did all of the boys' men's basketball and girls, but it was mostly double headers. So I probably did. But so I've been really, really fortunate. I enjoyed doing games in the gym down at Springfield before that became a prison. I enjoyed doing games at Nash Gym in Yankton before that became a prison. So there's a lot of cool places.
As you look back over the...
Am I dying? You're asking me an awful lot of as I look back questions, Lee.
No, you're not dying. You're not dying. It's things that we have sat there and said, And I'll this is where it's come from.
And by the way, Lee and I are good.
Yeah, with this,
I can give him. Yeah. So
we look back. We have just done a couple of interviews with some people here in the past couple of weeks, and we've talked about. It's been 4.5 years that I've been part of Big Sioux Media. I don't think it's been 4.5 years.
Right.
So my question, as I talk to you, I think about. Hopefully, I make it to where you're at, age-wise. And second of all, am I going to have that steel trap? What am I going to remember? And that type of thing.
Right.
And so, as we discuss that, you've done baseball, you've done basketball, you've done football. If you had to pick one.
Baseball.
Why?
Because it lends itself to this. It's basketball is easiest to do by far, simply because of the pace of play. They're moving. When they're not moving, you take a timeout and you go to commercial break. Baseball is slow and comfortable, and it lends itself. It's especially good on radio. Baseball and radio, to me, are absolute match made in heaven. It is perfect to, you have time to put in stories. You have time to talk about various things, which obviously appeals to me because, as I say, I can perhaps tell a story or two. But I did a baseball game last summer for the first time in like 5 years, and it was a ball. And yeah, baseball is my favorite. Now, if I were doing it every day for the Canaries, and you're following a bad team, and every night you're going to the ballpark, and these people that you get to know are gonna probably lose because that's what they do 2 out of 3 times, that might change my mind. But in general, doing baseball is the best. Yeah.
My turn to get a dig in. So you're not doing any Royals games?
I'm not doing any Royals games. No, and we're going to stink. But at least the good news is we knew we were going to stink. Why they signed a few free agents is beyond me, but because there's still going to be bad baseball in Kansas City. But did I mention our world title here recently? It was worth the 30-year wait. See, here's the deal. I'm a Golden State fan, and I have been since 1974. Nate Thurmond was my favorite player. Actually, 72, the first professional basketball game that I saw was in the early 1970s. I've been a Golden State fan. My favorite player, I love Nate Thurmond. Rick Barry was one of my favorite players. And back when I was in high school, they won a world title with Rick Barry. I didn't know it was going to be another 35 years. With the Royals were always good. They were in the hunt. They win a World Series in '85. I didn't know that was going to be another 30 years. So I've had an awful long drought. Those two have been broken. My Detroit Lions one still not over, and really no hope on the future for that.
Well, going back to baseball, you are invited anytime you want to do a baseball game. Matt and I will take you.
I know.
We will take you any amateur game, high school game.
Right.
Whenever you get the itch, you know where to call.
I do. And I appreciate that. You guys have reached out, and it just hasn't worked out, but it will one of these days.
Well, and you did get to do a basketball. You and Matt got to do a basketball game.
Absolutely. That was fun. That was a nice way to shake off some rust prior to the state tournaments and stuff. And, oh, by the way, got to see Vermillion, who were both pretty darn good. So, yeah, that was fun.
Is there a sequel to the book?
I got to sell this one first. And actually, I'm going to be having another book signing. Thelma Busk here in Del Rapids. Thelma Busk down at Blooms on Main was so nice when I went to her and I said, I need a place. Is it okay? And we had a wonderful turnout for that. The response to the book sales have been really, really good. I'm having them in various places across the state of South Dakota. I'm going to have one, hopefully I can announce tomorrow what a date and time is up in Huron, and I'm going to get up to Aberdeen. Been out to Rapid City with it and various points as well. But if I get this one sold, yeah, there will be. It's just kind of that simple. I enjoyed it. It was a labor of love, but there's more to tell. There's more stories to share. And actually, as I've been on the book tours, that's been one of the most fun things about this, is actually the book signings themselves. I got out to Spearfish, and Jim Thompson, who's in the book, he wanted me to come out and do one out there. And so I got to spend another 2 hours with Jim Thompson and hear a bunch of stories that aren't in the book. Yeah. I got to hang out, because there was one in Rapid City, I got to hang out with Tom Rudabush, who's been the voice, who has maybe broadcast. As a matter of fact, I'm not even going to do maybe. I'm willing to bet Tom Rudabush has broadcast more athletic events in this state than anyone in the history of the state. Tom used to do a regular schedule of high school basketball and football. He's been the voice of the Hard Rockers at South Dakota Tech for 30-some years. Plus, for 30-some years, he did post-22 baseball. So he's racking up the games. And I got to hang out with him, and I got to see various folks. But then that's where I hear other stories and get turned on to other history and that sort of thing. I did one up in Brookings at the Briggs Library, and John Stiglmeyer came to it. I mean, how great was that? And my grandkids happened to be there, and they got to meet Stig. They're Jackrabbits fans. And so that's really been the most fun. So maybe I'll just write another one so that I can do another book tour. We'll see.
So I know it's in a few bookstores,
It is.
smaller bookstores. Where can people, if they can't get to those bookstores, how do they get a book?
The first thing I would recommend is follow First Person Legendary South Dakota Sports Stories on Facebook. All right. And you can follow me on Twitter also at Mike Henriksen. But otherwise, you can go to sportsmaxradio.com and order. You can go to mariahpress.com and order, and we'll get you a signed copy. The nice thing about Facebook and social media is I'll keep you posted on where the books are, actually at retail locations near you, wherever you may be. But if you really need one, and like I say, I'm going to be having another one here in Dells coming up shortly. But if you really need one, sportsmaxradio.com. Just click on the tab. I'll sign it, personalize it, get it on out to you. By the way, I should tell you, me signing the book actually drops the value. But I'm still going to charge you full price. So just so you know ahead of time that that's the deal. All right?
They can get you in the afternoons?
They can. Calling All Sports with Mark Ovenden and Mike Henriksen. We just celebrated our 8th anniversary. We're on 11 radio stations, having a ball. Check your local listings. We're live in Aberdeen, Yankton, and Sioux Falls, and then played later in the day on various stations, including Madison. SportsMax Radio at 17 stations across the state of South Dakota each weekend, mostly on Saturday mornings. I'm lucky. I've wanted to do this since I was 9 years old, so I am just as blessed as I can possibly be to have the opportunity to do what I've always wanted to do.
And we've been blessed tonight for you to join us. We have, like I said, when I say this has been a 3-year process to figure this out, it has been a 3-year process.
Well, thank you.
So,
you're very kind.
Thanks for joining us,
My
Mike.
pleasure.
Thanks for joining us. We want to thank you for joining us this evening. This will be archived. If you missed some of the show, you can go back to Big Sioux Media in the archives under Voices of Big Sioux. We thank you for joining us and have a great night.